Welcome to Airgun Academy, presented by Pyramyd Air, your online airgun resource.
In this episode, we're going to talk about shimming a scope. There are a lot of ways to adjust the point of impact of a scope. Shimming is one of them, and I'm only going to concentrate on that one technique today. We adjust our scope with shims to compensate for barrel droop. What is barrel droop? Let me show you. I have a gun. You won't even have to argue about it. Do you see how the barrel is pointing down in relation to the spring tube? Well, your scope goes on the spring tube. If that barrel is pointing down, that barrel is drooping. Droop doesn't mean that the barrel is somehow curved. It just means the barrel points away from the way the scope is looking. Now, you might think, well, I've got a scope adjustment, I can just adjust for droop. No, you can't. That's the problem. When you start cranking in a lot of vertical elevation to adjust for droop, you get to a point in the elevation where the scope no longer can maintain zero. Now, what can we use to shim with? What is shim stock? Shim stock is anything that's thin. You can use plastic. This is an old membership card I have that's sealed in plastic. You can use credit cards a little too thick and a little too stiff. You can use business cards, which are just paper. You can even use soft drink cans that are made out of aluminum. Now, I haven't measured this one, but I prepared one, and I'm going to place it inside the rear ring like this. I just slide it down. Sometimes it tries to pop out. In this case, it's aluminum and it's staying there. And then the scope would be placed on top of the shim like this. And that shim lifts the rear of the scope just enough to make the scope point down. Now the question is, how much can you shim? And the answer is not very much. And that's why I'm showing you thin material. When you over shim and then tighten your scope mount, you get this. I'm going to bring the camera in here and show you this scope's tube has been crushed by over shimming, and then when you tighten the scope caps, they crush the aluminum scope tube. Well, what can you use besides shims, you might ask? When things get really bad, if you can't use thick shims, what can you do? There are bases for scope mounts that have built-in droop. You see that one? The back of this base is higher than the front, and that makes the scope point down. A lot of guns have big droop, and something like that is a quick fix. You can get an adjustable scope mount. They have scope mounts that adjust up and down and side to side, and that works really well because they don't put any extra pressure on the scope. And when it gets really bad, and I mean nothing else works, you can resort to a barrel bending jig like this. I've written a blog on this on the Pyramyd Air website. In fact, I've written a 5-part blog, so if you want to start bending barrels, read that before you do. Today we talked about shimming scopes. We shim because gun barrels droop. That's when the barrel is slanting down away from where the scope is looking. Because the scope is mounted so high above the barrel, droop is always pronounced when you're close. It's not so bad when you're out at long range. Droop is also caused by the barrel actually slanting down in relation to the gun, and I showed that to you. The scope's vertical adjustment does not have enough range to compensate for barrel droop. And a shim is a thin piece of material that you put under the scope to raise it just a little bit. Shims are made from hard material like plastic. They can be made from business cards. They can be made from soda can material. You lay the shim on top of the rear scope saddle and place the scope down on top of it. 1 or 2 shims are all you should use. More than that, and you're going to start bending the scope tube. And if shims don't work, there are other solutions like drooper bases, drooper mounts, adjustable mounts. And as a last resort, you can bend the barrel. We've covered all the bases on shimming scopes in this episode. Thanks for watching.